It is my firm belief and conviction that God wants to help us solve our problems. That God wants to help humans solve human problems. And it is my conviction that what Jesus is trying to do in this passage is help humans solve human problems. But before I get into that, I want to say first a word about the word that's translated hell. The word that's translated hell is not the word hell. There is no word hell in the Greek New Testament. There are multiple words that are translated hell, and none of them mean hell. This one happens to be a word Gehenna. And Gehenna is a transliteration in Greek from a Hebrew term, Gehinnom. And Gehinnom is a valley in the southeast of the city of Jerusalem. Now that valley has a very sordid and complicated history. And I'm just going to read to you from 2nd Chronicles just a little bit so that you'll hear. 2nd Chronicles is one of the many kind of histories of the Hebrew people. And this story starts, I think it's about 100 years after the reign of King David. So this is after David and Solomon reigned over the United Kingdom, and then the kingdom broke apart into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And this is like the 5th king of the southern kingdom. So 2nd Chronicles 28 says this: Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, i.e., he was messing up just like they were, because we know that they weren't doing it right, because you can tell who wrote this book. All right. He even made cast images for the Baals, and he made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and made his sons pass through fire according to the abominable practices of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the people of Israel. He sacrificed and made offerings on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. Now, his grandson, who also ended up reigning, did basically the exact same thing. This is beginning of chapter 33, just to make the point. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominable practices of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had pulled down, and erected altars to the Baals, made sacred poles, worshipped all the host of heaven, and served them. He built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem they shall bear my name forever. He built altars for all the hosts of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. He even made his sons pass through fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom, practiced soothsaying and sorcery, and dealt with mediums and wizards. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking the Lord to anger. Okay, so Ahaz, and then his son Hezekiah kind of like tried to undo some of the nastiness, and then Manasseh was like, that worked for him, we're going to go back to it. Contextually, in this period of time, in kind of what would be kind of that area that's called the Levant, that's what historians call what we often call Palestine, but that kind of whole area of the Middle East, there were a variety of groups of people that were occasionally using child sacrifice as part of their ritual practice. So especially there are a number of documented cases where like a walled city was surrounded and under siege, and it didn't look like it was going well, and so the elites and the high-ups would go and sacrifice their firstborn child alive in a fire in order to get the gods to help them win the battles. It was kind of like this, the most valuable thing you have, right? And so the Valley of Gehinnom is the place that's understood in Israel and Judah, right, in that area where the leadership of the Jews was doing some of this stuff. There are descriptions in Jeremiah of this giant brass kind of like brazier, right? Like there's a fire down here, and there's this image of the god Baal, and he's got his hands out, and you lay the human on there until it burns so badly it falls into the fire. I mean, it's like terrible, right? Like absolutely atrocious, gross stuff. And anybody who's following the God Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew people, knows that God breathed life into all of God's children. And so doing this is problematic on a variety of levels, right? Just like, basically, that's an understatement of the century, right? And so, I'll get to it in a minute, but Jeremiah prophesies against this, not just this practice, but this whole area, that this was such an atrocious behavior that happened in the valley of Gehenna, that it's going to be, and I'll read this to you in a minute, but it's going to get its name changed to the Valley of Slaughter. And all of the people that practiced all this terrible nonsense are all going to die there and be destroyed. Not tortured there forever, they're all going to die. In fact, the very end of the book of Isaiah, which Jesus quotes at a different point, says, I'm sure you've heard this before, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. That's the last line of Isaiah. And scholars believe that that's a reference to this place. Not that it's going to be eternal fire and torment, but that the crime here was so atrocious that the outcome of it is that it's going to be this total nastiness, death, desolation, destruction. This is like a horrible place, right? Now, later scholars, I received this message when I was in seminary, and I don't actually think this is accurate anymore, but some people have said that this is like a trash heap outside of Jerusalem, and they burn the trash there, and so there's this constant fire going in that area. But in my research recently, I found that there's not really a lot of archaeological evidence for that. They never found this giant statue where they roasted the children, and they never really found this giant garbage pit that had been burned a lot, because that kind of thing sticks around in the archaeological record, right? Like that's how we know about habitation around here is from these shell mounds and fire pits and stuff. So it's pretty unlikely that it ended up becoming this constant trash heap. That's often what people refer to when they talk about why this is translated hell. But it is this place of great nastiness, and it is this place that God saw of great deviation. And furthermore, it's this place where people were doing something atrocious and calling it holy. They were invoking the power of the divine to do some nastiness. Now that sounds like how a lot of people use hell. Invoking the power of the divine to do some nastiness. Gehenna. I happen to believe that God is intent on helping people solve problems. And I believe that Jesus is utilizing this piece of text that we got from Matthew 5 to help people solve problems. What's the problem with anger?
Separation.
Sure, it separates you from other people. What is another problem with anger? Violence is an often outcome of anger, sure.
It's under itself secondary emotion.
It's a secondary emotion, right? It covers up for the real feelings of sadness, betrayal, mourning, grief, fear. You know what my big problem with anger is? It's super common, and it's really easy to feel. That's probably my biggest problem with anger, is you can get there like that, right? Especially if you're not dealing with your stuff. Especially if you're not actually going in to feeling out what your feelings are, especially if you live in a culture that doesn't teach you to understand or feel your feelings, then anger is really easy. Just look around our political environment right now, that is the number one feeling, right? Top of the list. We're not sad about how things are going. We're not disappointed in how our leadership is doing. We're pissed, right? And everybody's going to tell you so. In fact, you get political points for being more angry. Think about politicians. Think about the way that politics is working right now. You are winning when you're angry, and you're a stupid loser when you're feeling your real feelings. Look at the way that Alex Jones got eviscerated for crying. Now, there's a lot to be said there, and we can talk about that later if you want, about the problematic nature of that person and whether those are alligator tears and whether he really cares about all the people whose lives he deeply harmed by sharing his conspiracy theories. But I just want to point out that he's being made fun of for having a real feeling. How does that produce God's righteousness? How does that help us actually move towards healing and reconciliation? You know what it does is it tells people you better not feel a real feeling, you better stay in your anger, which is what he was doing his entire career. I thought, God, at least he's being honest in this moment. Right, well, yeah, it's about him losing his tower of crap. But anyway, I'm digressing at this point, and I don't want to spend too much time here. So there's another feeling, another experience that's also very common and very human that Jesus lifts up in this text. It's the feeling of lust, right? Sexual attraction. What's the problem with sexual attraction? It'll get you in trouble. So, exactly. So what you just said, there's not a problem. It's very natural, right? It's a part of being human. Well, I think that the reason that Jesus pairs anger and lust together, right? These are two of the 7 carnal sins, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to spend any time on that. What I am going to say is that left unchecked, both of them turn people into objects. Anger and lust both have the consequence of turning people into objects. And when you turn people into objects, you can justify all manner of gross nastiness, suffering, domination, pain, violence, exploitation, control, all manner of human evil, whatever we call evil, can be justified if you lean hard enough into turning people into objects. In fact, you can sacrifice people in the name of your own fulfillment if you lean hard enough into turning people into objects. I would say that one of the primary problems that Jesus is identifying here is the problem of objectifying human beings. Humans are always subjects. We are always an end in and of ourselves. We are never a means to an end. And how common is it in our world today to look at human beings as a means to some other end?
Capitalism.
Good point. I think Jesus wants to help us solve this problem of objectifying human beings. And he knows that these two emotional orientations lead to that easily, if not checked. He also knows that they're super normal things, right? Feeling anger is super normal. And sometimes it's really helpful, because you know what anger does? It gives you energy. It helps you move on something. There is a righteous anger that can be a gift as long as it's guided by that deeper sense of what's the real feeling here. I'm angry because I'm really disappointed. I'm angry because I'm really sad. How can we continue to allow this to happen? And my anger might move me to do something about it. But if my anger is the only feeling I'm bringing to the table, right? It's like the only tool I have is a hammer. I'm gonna start smashing some stuff. Right? We all get that. I think Jesus wants to help us solve problems. Now, I don't know where all of you were at in our conversation earlier, but I just want to tell you that it has become my understanding in my faith life and in my faith journey that the primary problem that religion, that faith has to solve, has to respond to, has to care deeply about and be very thoughtful about. The primary problem is the problem of human suffering. That to me, if you have a religion that doesn't meaningfully address the problem, the reality, I guess we should say, of human suffering, then your religion is ultimately going to be worthless and people are going to leave. Because suffering, like anger and lust, is extremely normal, natural, and common.
Or if your religion causes
suffering. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people have left the faith, is they're saying, you're not responding to the issue of suffering, you're producing suffering. How can you be legitimate if you're actually producing the thing that I need responded to in the world, that I need God to care about? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to know that this is central in my interpretation of the cross. This is central in my interpretation of the death of Jesus, is the solidarity with the suffering people in the world. That to me is the cipher for making sense of the crucifixion, and anything else is a deviation from that central commitment of Jesus to be in solidarity with the suffering of the world. Now, when you start spending time in the problem of suffering, you move almost immediately into the problem of that which produces suffering, which I'm going to frame that out as a different theological problem called the problem of evil. There's the problem of suffering, and there's a separate but related problem called the problem of evil. Now, we know that, you know what? The chair didn't cause my broken toe. It was my not paying attention. The chair isn't evil, and neither am I. I just was in a hurry, right? That's not where evil is lying. But when someone throws the chair at me and breaks my toe, well, why did they throw the chair? What was happening? Were they, just completely out of sorts and they were not grounded in reality and it didn't have intention? Well, they tried to hit me with, right? We have to suss some of this stuff out. And that's how we disentangle the problem of suffering from the problem of evil. Evil has this profound sense of intent to it. I was doing Bible study at Brookdale, and I was really trying hard to sell this woman on the idea that these are two different problems, and she just wasn't having it. She wasn't having that I was going to separate evil from suffering, because she was really upset that the consequence of that was going to be that I was going to allow evil to continue to exist in the world. And I kind of thought to myself, good God, you think I'm powerful, don't you? You think I can just do something and make sure that there's no more evil in the world? Have you read the story of Noah, where God tried to drown all the evil people? You know that's what that story's about, right? It's not about all the fun animals. It's about murdering all the people. And God was like, I know what I'll do. I'll kill everybody but you, the one good guy in your family, and we'll fix the problem of evil. Check it out. God's got a solution. Drown them all, except for you. You're good. Yep. And then dry it out. Next second, what happens? Noah is so messed up by this that he just goes, I don't know how he does it, but he plants a vineyard and then immediately makes wine. Some kind of super fertile soil going on after the flood, I'm not sure. And he gets wasted because he's like, this is messed up. You're messed up. This is messed up. And then his kid sexually assaults him, like right away. And God's like, shit, that didn't work. We got to find another way. And that's the symbol of the rainbow. It's like we're going to find another way to deal with evil. Because killing our way out of evil ain't going to work. And so God picked a symbol that would tie us all together. Say, there's got to be another way to keep all of this together. I'm not going to aim my weapon at you anymore. That's what the rainbow is. It says, I'm not going to aim my weapon at you anymore. We're not going to kill our way out of the problem of evil anymore. How many people following Jesus today have no idea that that's what they're supposed to be saying, that that's what that's supposed to mean, and instead say, no, we can solve the problem of evil. We just figure out who's evil, and then we punish them, and we'll know who they are because they'll be wearing a rainbow pin. So I want to bring you to Jeremiah. Jeremiah talks about the Valley of Gehenna, and this is a few verses, 30 to 34. Jeremiah, I think, is really trying to help us figure out a different way. Now, it's not going to sound like it, but hear me out. This is Jeremiah chapter 7, starting at verse 30. For the people of Judah have done evil in my sight, says the Lord. They have set their abominations in the house that is called by my name, defiling it. And they go on building the high place of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth until there is no more room. The corpses of this people will be food for the birds of the air and the animals of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. And I will bring to an end the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of the bride and bridegroom in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, for the land shall become a waste. All right. Here we go. How does that solve the problem? I want to offer that the way that Jesus helps us solve the problem of evil is by reminding us that it's not our problem. That evil, this sense of this power, this entity, this force, that whatever it is that's compelling people to cause profound suffering in the world, that's God's job. If I could find one reason that I think Jesus would ever invest in any kind of concept of hell, it's because it's none of your business. Your job is to be in alignment with God. Your job is not to go to figure out who's not in alignment with God. And hell becomes this place that we can trust, this idea that God is sovereign. God's judgment is sovereign. God will right the wrongs. Your job is to stay in alignment with God. Your job is not to manage the evil of the world. Because guess what? You kind of can't. Your job is to remember that the problem that we have to solve is the problem of suffering. Now, what's interesting about this is if we really committed as human beings to resolve the problem of suffering, we would end most of the evil in the world. Because evil is defined by that which works to cause suffering in the world. And if we really committed to resolve the problem of suffering in the world, which Jesus is inviting us to do by looking at our own motivations, our own actions, our own emotional commitments, the ways that we're aligning what is natural and normal for us to produce objectification and domination and control and violence. If we actually spent time saying, you know what following Jesus is about? It's not about rooting out evil. It's about looking in the world and seeing where there is suffering and bringing the love of Christ into that space. It's like the ACLU. Now, I've really given all my liberal credentials here, but the ACLU does not try to stop Nazis from marching in the street. In fact, they'll go to court to defend Nazis marching in the street. Why? Do you think the ACLU likes Nazis? No. Why? Because what's going to stop the Nazis from marching? Is it fighting them? God, no. Do you think that's not exactly what they want? Why do they bring shields and bats and attach their flags to giant poles that, just so happen to be made out of iron? Because they want to fight you. That's what they want. Because it gives them more, it affirms and confirms that they are right, because nothing makes you feel more right than being oppressed. Now, that was a very complicated statement, and I'm sorry that I didn't think that through before I said it. We can talk about it later if you want to give me some grief about it, but there's nothing like being resisted that helps you feel right. No, the ACLU says, you know how you resist Nazis marching in your street? Is you march. The only fix for evil speech or harmful speech is more speech. That we
if you stop the Nazis, then you can stop anybody from expressing themselves.
Exactly. And so the real response is, how do we organize to speak louder and clearer about the reality of the presence and production of suffering in our world? Because if it is human, then it is true for all of us. If suffering is just a normal and natural part of human life, then it's true for every single human person. Every single human person knows about what it is to suffer, what it is to grieve, what it is to lose, what it is to be isolated and separated. And Jesus is trying to put that in the center of our life and our work. Not evil, because if evil is at the center, then we have to figure out what evil is, and who is evil and who isn't, and guess whose job that is? None your business, not yours. If you're going to give anybody that job, give it to God. As an aside, this is exactly what John Calvin was trying to do when he talked about predestination. Now, everybody got all hung up about whether they had a ticket, whether they were going to heaven or not, whether they were part of the elect few. But the whole point of John Calvin saying it's already figured out is it's none your business. It's already worked out. You can't do anything to make it any different. All you got to do is live. You don't earn points. You don't get a ticket. You're never going to know. Now, all of his acolytes totally turned that around and said, all right, we got to get a formula. We got to figure this out. Who's going to be on the boat and who's not. There's only so many life rafts on the Titanic, etc., etc. But the point was to say, it's none your business. What is your business is how you're going to respond to the existence of suffering. And guess what? If we figure out how to do that, we will resolve many of the problems that we call evil. But we will do it in a way that brings compassion and care and kindness and generosity and love and healing into the world, which is not what you bring. Those are not the tools of responding to evil. Yes?
I have a question. What if evil is directed at you?
Good question. Good question.
Because I don't have an answer.
So, interestingly enough, I had a friend, a black queer woman, hit me up this week and say that her church assigned her to preach, she's a lay person, but assigned her to preach for Juneteenth Sunday on loving your enemies. And I thought that was really pretty messed up thing to do, to ask a black queer woman to come into a predominantly white church and preach on why you should love your enemies on Juneteenth Sunday. And I was like, setting all of the messed up politics of that aside, let's talk about this. What's Jesus all about when he says, love your enemies? Well, I told her, go to the Greek, always go to the Greek first. In the Greek, the word that's translated enemies really just means someone who wants to do you harm. It doesn't have anything to do with you, it has everything to do with them. Somebody who wants to do you harm. They're not your enemy, they're just problematic, right? And so what are you supposed to do with someone who wants to do you harm? You're supposed to love them. Well, what does that mean? I think it means that you maintain your sense of integrity. I connect this directly to how I understand the concept of forgiveness. I don't forgive you because because you deserve it, because you earned it, because you blah, blah, blah. I forgive you because I don't want to hold on to all that crap you brought me. You brought me a bunch of baggage and it's not mine, that's yours. So I'm going to forgive you and I'm going to treat you the way that I treat people regardless of how you treat me. Now, if you broke trust with me, that's a whole separate issue. Trust and forgiveness are different things. You broke trust with me, I changed my approach, but I'm still going to be me. I think it's the same. With folks that are evil, we got to figure out, and whatever, I'm sorry that I'm using that term, but if we're going to identify that, then we got to figure out how to do boundaries, how to do appropriate approach, how to keep ourselves safe, how to anticipate if there's not a lot of trust there. You guys know about varying levels of trust in varying relationships. Some people you can let close, some people just stroll into your house and open your refrigerator, right? And some people, like, you know, there's a gate at the edge of the property and that's where you talk to them from, right? But I think when somebody's bringing that to you, the question that Jesus is going to ask you is, are you going to let this change who you are? Because if you do, then they have more power over you than you let God have over you. So who are we going to be is really the question. In the face of the problem of evil, are we going to spend our time trying to solve the problem of evil and be manipulated by the presence of evil? Or are we going to continue to be followers of Jesus who are trying to respond to the problem of suffering? I'm sure that was an unsatisfying answer to your question. And if you have a specific context you want to talk about, we can have a conversation about that. But I think this is it, guys. This is the center of it, is if Jesus ever wanted us to believe in hell, it's so that we would know that it's none of our business. And that our call is to care enough about suffering that we stop centering the perpetrator in our response. We center the survivors.